My name is David Bohan. I'm involved in the PREAR project. The PREAR project is designed to develop farmer acceptable rotations with a view to protecting ecosystem services in the face of climate change. The major aim of the project was to show that we could in principle get farmers to choose rotations or to develop rotations that were acceptable to them. A subsidiary aim was in a large part to show that modelling rotations or considering rotations was a good way of mitigating climate change, because at the moment quite a lot of work on changing farming systems is orientated towards modelling effects on individual crops, so how wheat changes or whatever. Our feeling was that farmers don't adopt new crops in that way. They adopt them by integrating them into existing rotations or modifying their current rotations. So you actually have to approach it from a rotational point of view rather than an individual crop point of view. We've deliberately started with the farmer. For us, it became very clear in the early part of the project when we started talking to farmers that approaching the project from a pure academic scenario point of view, sort of change in temperature in 30 years' time, doesn't work very well with farmers. Farmers don't see the world that way. They don't understand what that means for their weather. They work with weather. It's daily rainfall, all those sorts of things. They can't decompose that kind of way of presenting things. It had an effect. The responses we were getting were actually in some senses more negative. They treat all these scenarios as being constraints. So what we try to do is change things around a little bit. We try to phrase things in terms of positive scenarios and negative scenarios. A positive scenario is something that is an opportunity. So for example, the spring would start earlier because there would be fewer late frosts. That gives farmers an opportunity to grow different types of crops by sowing them earlier in the season. A negative scenario might be a constraint such as there would be more dry periods in the summer, which maybe limit some of the crop choices you can make. So presenting it like that, we actually got much better balanced kind of positive and negative approaches to climate change rather than pure negative. And then we incorporated that within a modelling tool or a gaming tool. Basically, it's a computer game. It presents Europe as a map. And it presents the 10 major crops across Europe, the JRC models, and it allows farmers to reconstruct their own rotation and to see what is likely to happen to that rotation as we move into the future. And then, once they've understand something of that and how that works in their locality and the rest of Europe, they can then actually start adding new crops in or changing crops or even constructing entire new rotations that actually deliver them back some of the things they might lose if they stuck to their current rotation. But it will be available to everyone to use. It's built on top of publicly available information. The JRC published this kind of stuff. It's not ours to keep. But and our hope is very much that other people will start using it, or that this kind of thing will inspire other people to develop add-ons. We've done focus groups with farmers. We actually want to do a lot more of that. What has happened in this project, the title of the project in some senses, or the implication of the project, is that we can produce scenarios of acceptable rotations for the future across Europe. But actually, because we work in particular localities, we're particularly working in France, the scenarios that we've created or the rotations that we've created are actually for those areas. There are other areas in Europe. So we want to do more work to actually understand whether there are patterns in the scenarios that farmers come up with that maybe would allow us to extend some of those scenarios to a much greater scale that can actually start to touch policy. But ultimately, the long term is to actually do that, is to actually go to lots of places in Europe, talk to farmers in all of those areas, and actually build a much larger, more general kind of like scenarioizing of rotation. I think what we see coming through is that if we want to do things and make farmers change their practice, it sounds a bit top down there. We want farmers to change their practice. That's actually part of the problem. What I think needs to come is that if we're going to make policy, that policy should reflect much more what farmers think, what the public thinks. There needs to be some kind of joining up of people. I am not very experienced in talking to policymakers. I don't know how it works. I'm naive enough and hopeful enough that actually if we just get everyone together it will work. That might be very naive, but it's clear to me that if we're going to make policy that actually is acceptable, it has to touch people much more. You have to talk in their language. These positive, negative scenarios, seeing the same information.